Hello, computer science geeks. All right, tell me what's going on here. I'm not going to give you much time. These two little characters, Bob the Builder, then an apple, I don't know, Mr. Stride. Just tell me. I'll tell you. Well, it's sending arguments into a constructor, and then out comes an instance of your object. Mr. Stride, you're talking nonsense. Okay, I know. This is an argument. I'm sending it to a guy who does construction, and then out comes this object. Nice. What the heck are you talking about? All right, here we're going to talk about constructors that build objects. So at the end of this, you'll be able to tell me what a constructor is, how to write multiple of them, and then what a default constructor is. Lots of stuff going on. Not only that, I'm going to introduce to you this constructor. I didn't even put that on the slide. That's just bonus. A constructor is a special method that gets called as a part of an object's creation. When you call new, when you type that in and you do new, it's calling a method. And usually it's a method that you did not write, but most of the time you will write a method. I know you haven't done it yet, but you will. So you're going to have a method that gets called automatically on creation. It's called a constructor. This allows you to ensure that you're creating the object the way that you want to create it, not just with default values. Most of the time default values have 0 in them, and if you create an object and it has information in there that you want to, control, like maybe, I don't know, a fraction. You don't want your fraction to have a 0 denominator because that would crash. So you want to make sure that we set that correctly. How? Well, we would write a constructor. So it looks almost like a regular instance method. So there's no static, but there's also no return type. None, not void. So look right here between public and the class name. So I got my class name. I create a method with the class name. Got my parentheses. And there's nothing here. It's not void or anything. It must be exactly, the method name must be exactly the same name as the class. This method here will get called as a constructor whenever you do new on an object. No return type. So here's the typical syntax here, just public and then the type. I don't know, I should put class name, put in the parameters, any that you want, put on number of statements in, yada, yada, yada. Here's an example. Okay, I create my fraction object. Nothing in there. I got my two arguments, n and d. I'm going to have my numerator, which is an instance field of my fraction. I'm going to set that to the value of n here, and then I'm going to have my denominator, which is an instance field of my fraction. I'm going to set that in there as well, so then I can set the values in there correctly. All right, let's learn more. Can a class have multiple constructors? Not just one, but two, maybe even many. Yes, as a matter of fact, you can. It's just like overloading a method. So here on the left, I have a fraction constructor with no arguments. And when it gets created, by default, the numerator is 0, and I'm going to say the denominator is 1. Again, these are instance fields. I'm not showing you the whole class. But I'm setting the instance fields of this fraction class so that the numerator is 0, the denominator is 1. Then I can have yet another constructor. See, I'm waiting for you to fill it in. Another constructor with no return types down here. Same name as a class, but it has different number and type of arguments than we have up here, just like we overload a method. Then here I can explicitly set my numerator to n, my denominator d. Boom, there we go. So here's what would happen. I can create my fraction object, call new fraction here over here. That would call this method here. Okay, declare my type, new variable. All right, I probably should call it f2. f2 equals new fraction 1, 2, calls this constructor down here. Awesome. What if I call fraction f new fraction with just a 5? There is no constructor that only takes one argument. That would fail. All right, so far so good. I know it's working well. Now, up until this point, you haven't created any constructors yourself. So how are things been working? You've been telling me it's doing these constructors. Well, what's happening is that the compiler says, you know what, you didn't provide a constructor for yourself, but that's all right. I got you. I got you. I'm going to create a constructor for you. I'm going to have no parameters in there. I'm going to create a parameterless or an argumentless constructor for you. Okay? So which of these classes here has a default constructor? Why or why not? Okay, mostly a trick question. Okay, I'm not going to do the whole song. All right, Class A. Class A here has a constructor. Class B has a constructor. Class C has no constructor, at least not that I could see. So which one has a default constructor? The answer is only my Class C has a default constructor down here. The default constructor is what the compiler provides for you. If you did not write a constructor, then a constructor will be provided for you, okay? So here I provided a constructor, my class A, and then I said, hey, A is going to equal 3. This is not my default constructor. This is an argumentless constructor, okay? This here is another constructor that takes one argument. Why would this fail here? I don't quite understand. My class B, failure equals new my class B. Why doesn't it just call the default constructor? It's because once you provide any constructor in the class, the compiler says you must know what you're doing. Perhaps you don't, but the compiler thinks you do. And it creates nothing. It does nothing for you. It says you know what you're doing, you're on your own, kid. So I'm not creating the default constructor. So you only have one constructor in this class and it takes one parameter. So if I were to call new my class B with no arguments, that's what I'm saying, don't argue with me, then it'll fail because there's no argument in class. There's no constructor in class B that has no arguments. These will succeed. My class A, create a new identifier called well, new class, my class A with no arguments, calls that, that's fine. That's my constructor with no arguments. And then if I do this down here, I'll call my default constructor with no arguments down there, and that is well done. That's right. Can I call a method in a constructor? Why, yes, you can. So it happens all the time. I have my constructor. Again, no return type here. I could put any arguments if I wanted in here, but I didn't in this case. I'm just creating a parameterless or an argumentless constructor. And I called a method in here called print stuff. Hey, that's just fine. Can I call another constructor inside a constructor? Woohoo! Yes, you can, but it's done a little bit oddly, okay? What you do is you're going to use the this keyword. I know we've already used this keyword in a different way, and yet this is yet another way. So I have my argumentless constructor here, and I want to set the numerator to 0 and the denominator to 1. And so what I'm just going to do is I'm going to call this constructor here by calling this. It's the same constructor in this class on this object that I'm creating. I'm going to call this constructor with the numerator 0, denominator 1, and I'm going to set those in there. And then we are all done. Cool. That is this constructor. Notice that there's no dot operator at all. There's no return type at all. Not even void. But that's how I can have one constructor call another constructor. If I were to create an object and say fraction with no arguments, it would come into here, and then it would call down here, and if I wanted, I could have more stuff up in here, which I just simply do not. All right, that's the constructors for you today. I'm sure you know a lot. Go out and build.